Hey guys, Pastor Todd here. It's Friday. Some of you may have heard today be called Good Friday. Why is it good? If Jesus is doing something for us that's really, really hard, going to the cross and dying for us, why would we call that good? Well, it's because we know what happens on Sunday, Easter Sunday. Jesus didn't stay dead. He died for us so that we would know God forever and ever. And that's why we call it Good Friday, even though Jesus was preparing to do something really, really, really hard. I have another question for you. Have your parents or an adult that you trust ever asked you to do something and you didn't want to do it? I know that's happened to me before. I can remember that as a kid many, many times, not wanting to do what my parents said. But deep down I trusted them, and I knew they knew what was best for me. In the story today, we're going to see and hear Jesus praying to his heavenly Father and wondering if there's another way, if he really has to do it God's way. We also hear Jesus say, well, I want to do things your way, God, even though this is hard. So today's story is called A Dark Night in the Garden. The Garden of Gethsemane. And this story is found on page 294 of our Jesus Storybook Bible. Now, yesterday we heard a story read by William about Jesus sharing a special meal with his friends. And this story starts out with Jesus and his friends not in the upper room having a meal together, but outside in a garden. The wind was picking up now, blowing clouds across the moon, shrouding the garden in darkness. "Stay up with me?" Jesus asked his friends. They said yes and waited under the olive trees, but they were tired and soon they fell asleep. Jesus walked ahead alone into the dark. He needed to talk to his heavenly Father. He knew it was time for him to die. They had planned it long ago, he and his Father. Jesus was going to take the punishment for all the wrong things anybody had ever done or ever would do. "Papa, Father," Jesus cried, and he fell to the ground. "Is there any other way to get your children back? To heal their hearts? To get rid of the poison?" But Jesus knew there was no other way. All the poison of sin was going to have to go into his own heart. God was going to pour into Jesus' heart all the sadness and brokenness in people's hearts. He was going to pour into Jesus' body all the sickness in people's bodies. God was going to have to blame his Son for everything that had gone wrong. It would crush Jesus. But there was something else, something even more horrible. When people ran away from God, they lost God. It was what happened when they ran away. Not being close to God was like a punishment. Jesus was going to take that punishment. Jesus knew what that meant. He was going to lose his Father, and that, Jesus knew, would break his heart in two. Violent sobs shook Jesus' whole body. Then Jesus was quiet, like a lamb. "I trust you, Papa," he said. "Whatever you say, I will do." Suddenly, through the trees, a glitter of starlight flashed off steel. Into the quiet garden came whispers, muffled voices, clanking metal, and the sound of boots marching. Jesus stood up. He woke his friends. "Now is the time," he said gently. "Everything that was written about me, what God has been telling his people all through the long years, It's all coming true. And into the night, with burning torches and lanterns, with swords and clubs and armor, they came, an army of soldiers. Judas led them straight to Jesus so they could arrest him. Jesus was waiting for them. Peter leapt up, took a sword, and tried to defend Jesus. He sliced off a guard's ear. Jesus immediately touched the guard and healed him. Peter, he said, this is not the way. Peter didn't realize that no army, no matter how big, could ever arrest Jesus. Not unless Jesus let them. Then Jesus, who had never done anything except love people, was arrested, as if he were a criminal. Jesus' friends were afraid, so they ran away and hid in the dark shadows. The guards marched Jesus off and took him to the leaders. The leaders put Jesus on trial. "Are you the Son of God?" they asked. "I am," Jesus said. "Who do you think you are to call yourself God? You must die for calling yourself the Son of God." Only the Romans were allowed to kill prisoners. So the leaders made a plan. "We'll tell the Romans this man wants to be our king, and then they will crucify him." But it would be all right. It was God's plan. "It was for this reason that I was born into the world," Jesus said. That's a hard story to hear. It must have been even harder for Jesus' friends to see him being taken by soldiers, having heard Jesus tell them that he was going to suffer and die. It must have been very confusing. And even though that's a hard story to hear, we know the ending. We know about Easter Sunday and that Jesus came back, our rescuer. Today's verse is this: "Yet not what I will, but you will." And this goes back to that question I asked you. If your parents or a trusted grown-up has ever asked you to do something that you didn't want to do, but you knew and trusted their judgment and knew that it was best. Jesus knew that he needed to go to the cross. And he did it willingly for us, for you and me, and the entire world. We'll see you tomorrow.